Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel where we dive deep into the story making headlines and stirring conversations across the globe. Today's story is sparking serious debate, so buckle in. An Episcopal church in the United States has publicly announced it will not assist in resettling white South Africans, specifically Afrikaners, who have recently been granted refugee status. Their reason: the church says patronizing white South African refugees over other groups in need is, quote, unfathomable. It is a stance that raises eyebrows and emotions. Supporters of the church decision say it is about equality and global justice. Critics, on the other hand, argue it is blatant discrimination and that every refugee deserves the same shot at a new life regardless of race. This one got layers: political, historical, and ethnical. So watch closely because public opinion is split and is heating up. Make sure you drop your thoughts in the comments. Are we witnessing principled justice or selective compassion? Let's break it down.
We can't be ourselves in the Episcopal Church and take the step of resettling white Afrikaners from South Africa. Our church has a long commitment to racial justice and reconciliation, and we have historic ties with the Anglican Church of South Africa. Desmond Tutu is a part of been a partner in this work for us. So we're just not able to take this step. It's not in line with anything that we're about. And the reality is we felt like we cannot be ourselves as the Episcopal Church and take part in this step of resettling white Afrikaners from South Africa. The moral decision making for us has so much to do with the way in which this all took place. The refugee resettlement program, which we've been a part of for more than 40 years, was basically shut down in January. So almost no refugees have been admitted to the United States since the end of January. People that have been waiting for years and are still waiting, who have been of service to this country, who are persecuted, are waiting to receive entrance. And this particular group has been fast-tracked over top of all of these others. So right there, that's problematic. And really, it's hard to imagine they fit the definition of refugee by most definitions. The president can certainly determine who he wants to admit to the country, but it just doesn't align with our values at this point.
We don't want to see people be.
I don't know what the administration's motivations for it is. I can't speak to that. But what it appears to us is that some people are being privileged over others, and it appears that white people are being privileged over people of color for no real apparent reason that data at least shows. So we feel like it's a line we've been asked to cross. Our hand's been forced, and we feel like we're doing the honorable thing and just asking to be released from our obligations.
And it's not the first. First was the Pope, Leo XIV, condemning Trump's cruelty and demanding compassion. Now it's the Episcopal Church. Preferential treatment of white refugees from South Africa contradicts everything we stand for. Presiding Bishop Sean Rowe, Trump's administration, asked the church to prioritize white African refugees from South Africa.
We have some huge news right now. The Episcopal Church has officially ended its partnership with the United States government to help resettle refugees after the United States government chose to make an exception to resettle white South African residents over other refugees. In a major letter issued just minutes ago, the Episcopal Church has decided to end this nearly 4 decades old relationship between the church and the federal government, citing its moral opposition to resettling white South African residents who have been classified as refugees by Donald Trump and leaving other refugees out, like Afghan refugees. Earlier this year, the United States government really ended all refugee resettlement programs, but recently made an exception for white South African residents, and the first batch of white South African resettled refugees actually landed in America today. Well, now the Episcopal Church is saying no to the federal government. Spread the word. I'll do a full breakdown on my Substack, link to my bio, so subscribe for free and follow along for more.
The Episcopal Church just ended a 40-year agreement with the U.S. government. What was the reason behind this? Because they were asked to prioritize white South African refugees over the brown and black refugees that have been waiting for years. What was the church's response? They said no. They said that's not justice and that's not what they stand for. Since the 80s, they've helped resettle over 100,000 people. But they walked away from the money because they refused to be a part of racial favoritism dressed up as policy. The Pope also just spoke out, saying we need to defend free speech and free press, otherwise the truth gets buried. So tell me this, why are churches, besides white Christian nationalist evangelical churches, speaking out louder on human rights than our own elected leaders? I mean, what happens when moral clarity comes from the pulpit rather than the podiums? Maybe it's time we actually listen.
Oh, this isn't about race. This is about racism. Taking brown people and actively removing them from the country, whether they have a criminal history or not, whether they're American citizens or not, babies that are American citizens, children with cancer, absolutely not a single olive branch to them, don't give a shit. But when it comes to that color South Africans, all of a sudden we're taking them in as refugees. You know, the very people who thrived on an apartheid system in South Africa. And what kicked this all off were the South Africans on this app that were like, hey, Americans, stop real quick. And these videos are of them literally telling Americans that these refugees that are coming in are not the best of their society. And I hope by now most people have understood that nothing that this regime does is by accident. It's on purpose. It's letting you know these are the people we consider refugees, but don't talk to us about Syrians. Don't talk to us about Palestinians. Like, don't talk to us about any of those. You know what? Because they're not the complexion that we give a shit about. Oh, and Ukraine, well, guess what? That doesn't bode well with our Ruski buddy. So guess what? That doesn't count either. Now, we want some strong segregationist roots returning to this country.
A hard lesson that the Afrikaner refugees are going to have to learn is that the second they step on U.S. soil, their status as refugees, as immigrants, is now a core part of their identity. And any sympathy, any empathy they would have had for being refugees is out the window, because typically there is only one political party, one side of the political spectrum, I guess is more accurate to say, that does have sympathy for refugees, that is willing to aid them and help them acculturate or assimilate. And because of their conditions of acceptance into this refugee status, like, that is out the window for them, because the conservatives are not going to treat them with any sympathy as soon as it's spotlighted as to how much funding is going to this program for them. And the other thing is that whoever they were before this is now going to be under extreme spotlight. People are going to be interested as to who these Afrikaners are, anything that they ever did, anyone who ever knew them, any scrap of their information on the internet is now going to be open to the public to criticize, to trace back to them. And anything that they do, at least until like their grandchildren fully assimilate and lose their accents, is going to be brought up that they were these Afrikaner refugees. If any of them ever gets a DUI, if any of them ever has a freak out in public because they're having a bad day, anything like that, like, the whole of the United States is going to find out about it within 24 hours. And it is always going to mention that they were these Afrikaner refugees, and anything that they did previously that is discovered in these next few days is going to be also attached to that. And that's horrifying. The United States is not a place that's kind to immigrants when you are so obviously an immigrant. And from what other South Africans have been saying, like, they are not going to blend in at all. And it's going to be tough for them, and no one is going to feel sorry for them throughout this process or really be willing to offer a hand.
Let's talk directly about what is happening here. A US-based Episcopal church has made headlines after publicly stating it will not assist with the resettlement of white South African refugees, specifically Afrikaners who have been granted asylum in the United States. Their reasoning: They say that choosing to support their refugees over others, particularly from historical marginalized groups, is unfathomable. Now, this position has struck a nerve, and not just in religious or political circles. It's making people ask, who deserves help when everyone is suffering? Are we looking at equality or exclusion? Let's unpack the facts, the reaction, and the moral weight of this decision. First, some background. In recent years, some white South Africans, many of them Afrikaners, have applied for refugee status in countries like the US, Canada, and Australia, citing racial violence, economic discrimination, and political instability back home. They argue that they are being targeted both through physical violence on rural farms and through structural policy like land expropriation without compensation. Critics often dismiss these claims as exaggerated or politically motivated. They argue that while South Africa does face significant crime and inequality, while South Africans, especially Afrikaners, still hold the prosperous economic power and benefit from the legacies of apartheid. But refugee law doesn't weigh suffering based on your history. It evaluates each case on current threat and whether the applicant meets the international legal definition of refugee. So if the US government grants asylum to someone, it means they pass that bar. Legally, they are in danger, period. Now, here's where things get complicated. The church refusal to support these specific refugees brings up serious ethnical and theological questions. The Episcopal Church, like many other religious institutions, has a long tradition of assisting refugees, usually regardless of race, nationality, or religion. Their work has always been rooted in compassion, in the belief in the dignity of all human beings. So when they say it's unfathomable to help this group, that is a major statement. What they seems to be implying is that it's improper or even injustice to offer resource to white refugees when so many black and brown refugees are still struggling for basic help. On the surface, this is about patriotism, but underneath, it reveals a deep discomfort with privilege, historical injustice, and optics of white victimhood in a post-colonial context. For many people, especially on the progressive left, the idea of white South Africans as refugees feels jarring. It challenges their view of global power dynamics. After all, Afrikaners were the architects and beneficiaries of apartheid, a brutal system that oppressed the black majority for decades. To some, the idea that they are now in need flames the narrative and feels like a distortion of justice. But does that mean their suffering should be disqualified? Let's be real. Pain doesn't come with a purity test. Refugee status isn't supposed to be granted or denied based on whether your ancestors did bad things. It's about the present danger and the legal right to seek asylum when your life is at risk. And that's why the decision from the church is controversial. It sends a message, intended or not, that some lives are more worthy of compassion than others. That we are not just weighing need, we are weighing guilt. Of course, many defenders of the church stance would argue the opposite. They did say that in a world of limited resources, it's both moral and strategic to patronize those who have been systemically marginalized. That in the face of overwhelmingly global displacement from Syria, the Congo, Haiti, politician, it doesn't make sense to use resources on a group that statistically is far less vulnerable. But there is a big risk in playing this kind of moral mass. Once you start measuring pain against privilege, compassion becomes conditional, and that cuts against the core values of humanitarian aid and arguably teaching of Christianity itself. Let's talk about the optics of this situation, because let's be honest, this isn't just about theological or logistics. This is about how it looks. The church may be trying to avoid backlash from their base, many of whom are progressive, socially conscious, and deeply aware of racial history. Supporting white refugees from South Africa might not align with their public image. It may even appear wrongly or rightly as endorsing a narrative that is being co-opted by white nationalist groups in the past. That is a tough line to walk, but leadership means being willing to face criticism, to do what is right, not what is popular. And here's the deeper question for all of us. Are we building a world where every human life is equally valuable, or one where justice gets filtered through ideology? If we can't help everybody, that is a reality we have to face. But when we refuse to help someone because of who they are, we step onto dangerous ground. There is also a ripple effect to consider. Public decisions like this don't just affect policy, they affect perception. They fuel the division, they harden people's opposition, and they give ammunition to those who already believe institutions are biased against certain groups. Already, we are seeing reactions across social media and opinion columns ranging from outrage to full-throated support. Some are calling this reverse discrimination, others are saying it's a long overdue reckoning with how we defy suffering. But here is the thing, two things can be true at once. Yes, white South Africans come from a context of historical privilege and oppression, and yes, some of them are now in real danger, facing violence and instability they didn't create. Those truths doesn't cancel each other out. They complete the picture, but they don't erase the need for compassion. And that brings us to a broader point. We have to get better at holding complexity. The world isn't binary. It's not always good guys and bad guys. Victims and violence often is a messy overlap of history, identity, and circumstances. Churches, governments, and communities need to move with nuance, not just ideology. That doesn't mean ignoring injustice, but it does mean refusing to replace one form of exclusion with another. Refugee policy must be guided by clear, consistent principles. If someone is granted asylum, they are entitled to the same dignity and support as anyone else, regardless of race, background, or the political discomfort their story might create. So what is next? Well, this story is far from over. Public pressure may push the church to revisit its stance or double down. Meanwhile, Afrikaner refugees will continue seeking help wherever they can, and the conversation about who gets to be a refugee and who deserves help will only grow louder. Whatever your view, this moment is a test, not just a policy but a principle. Because if we only defend the vulnerable when it fits our worldview, are we really defending them at all? Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown thoughtful, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more content like this, and drop your opinion in the comments below. Do you agree with the church decision, or do you think they crossed a moral line? Let's have a real conversation. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and as always, stay grounded.